The Moth is about people telling stories.
Real stories. Everyone has a story.
They get people to come and tell theirs.
For one night only, in front of a live audience.
All of them
Great storytellers.
but
They've only got so much time.
Before the violin starts to play.
And cuts them off.
It can get ugly sometimes.
It's not like they're reading from a book. There's no script.
Just them and the audience.
pure storytelling.
Hi. Thank you for coming to the Moth. My name is Kate Smith. I am your host for the evening. This is Trio's presentation of the Moth, an evening of storytelling, and tonight's theme is What Lies Beneath? Stories from the Underworld. So without any further ado, I present to you Mr. Dominic Dunn.
I used to be, this happened in about 1969, 1970. I was a very different kind of guy then than I am now, and I was kind of full of myself. I was the vice president of a studio in Hollywood, and I knew all the stars. I was, you know, all that kind of stuff, and I went down to Acapulco on a vacation with some movie stars. And I came back on Western Airlines, and it was a Thanksgiving weekend. And the terminal was mobbed, utterly mobbed. And I was going through customs, all dressed up. And the custom agent said to me, "Would you follow me, please?" And I said, "Why? What? He said, "Would you come with me, please?" He took me into a room where there were a couple of other guys, and he said to me, "Are you carrying any drugs?" I said, "Me?" You know, up with all the attitude. I said, "Of course not." But I was. In this pocket here. I don't know why. When you could buy it on every street corner in Beverly Hills, I felt compelled to buy a lid of grass from a beach boy in Acapulco. And so they go through this thing, they find the grass. They made me take off all my clothes, naked. It's the most humiliating thing you can believe. They even, you know, do all this to see if it's up there. It was just the grass, that's all I had. But it might have, as if I were carrying crack, this thing. The next thing, the police arrive, I get dressed. I am handcuffed behind my back. They take me through the main waiting room of Western Airlines. There are two big, tall Irish cops. As you can see, I'm small. They had me one here, so that my feet weren't quite touching the floor, which is not one of the great looks, especially for the vice president of a film studio in a Brooks Brothers blazer and Gucci shoes. It was the same year as the Charlie Manson got caught for the Sharon Tate murders. But Charlie Manson couldn't have drawn a bigger crowd than I drew, being carried through the waiting room of Western Airlines on that Thanksgiving weekend. And the shaming thing that I've never recovered from is that my brother and sister-in-law, who are the famous writers, John Gregory Dunn and Joan Didion, were there to greet me, and as a surprise, they never approved of me anyway, and as a surprise, they brought 2 of my 3 kids with them. And the kids saw me like this and this. And outside the door, there was a police car parked and with one of those red lights that goes around and around and around. And it was shame, humiliation beyond shame. And we go through the doors, and they open the door of the car, and they pushed me into the car. And within seconds, they'd gone through my pockets. They had my card that said I was the vice president of 20th Century Fox Pictures. And from then on, they called me Mr. Vice President. Oh, Mr. Vice President. Oh. So we get to the Venice, California jail, a rotten place. And I did this, and they took my mug shot. But I wasn't put in with the drunks and the druggies because I had crossed a border with a lid of grass. So I was put in a cell with a guy who had killed his wife the night before. Now, I got his story before I went in. He had done 20 years for killing another woman. He'd gotten out a week earlier, and the night before this, he'd killed his second woman. So they put me in the cell with this guy, and typical of the kind of guy I was in that period of my life, I snubbed the killer. I just didn't have any time for him at all. And there were 2 bunks. And I thought, the damn fool, he took the top one. So good, I get the bottom one. And so I was in the bottom bunk just sitting there. And then I realized why he had taken the top bunk. Because the toilet overflowed like Vesuvius. The water shot up, it was all over, and there was flotsam and jetsam all over the place. It was so revolting, I cannot tell you. And I'm sitting there, not knowing what to do, and the killer looks down, and he says, "Would you like to come up here and share my bunk?" So I go up, crawl up, and he was the first killer I'd ever been with. I'd been in a... And we sat up all night talking. And he was more concerned with me than he was with the fact that he killed a woman the night before, and he'd already killed another one 20 years ago. He said, "Listen, I got cancer, I haven't got long, they'll take care of me, I'll be all right." And he said, "But it's you we gotta worry about." He said, "You can never be in a place like this again, not a guy like you." And so dawn came, and my brother and sister-in-law, Miss Didion, arrived with bail money. And I got out, and the killer and I hugged each other goodbye. and anyway, I got home. I thought, I just can't imagine anything worse than this. My arraignment date was set for the following Tuesday. My phone rings in my apartment. Then the lawyer said, "No matter what, don't tell anybody. I mean, I was a vice president of the thing, and I knew all these people, and it would have been a big story. And so the phone rings. Dominic, this is Belden Cattleman. I thought, Belden Cattleman? Belden Cattleman was a Las Vegas figure. Belden Cattleman was famous for having burnt down El Rancho Vegas for the insurance money. Belden Cattleman was famous for his poker parties where he had peepholes in the ceiling that he had a guy up in the ceiling who gave him signals and the thing. This is the kind of guy Belden Cattleman was. And he's calling, he says, he had moved to Beverly Hills. He says, I'd like you to get over to my house. I'd never heard from him before, I mean, on the phone, and I'd never been to his house. And he said, Baroda Drive, blah, 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 and so forth. But it wasn't like he was asking me, he was telling me. So I drive over to his house, and he had bought the old Gary Cooper mansion. It was a house I knew because Gary Cooper's daughter was my daughter's godmother. And I rang the bell, and there was this glass door with wrought iron in front of a beautiful house. And this girl, so delicious, called Jackie Lane. She was an English starlet. Oh, gosh. She was an English starlet. And she came and opened the door, and she was the cutest thing I ever saw in this mini dress. And she goes, hi, Dominic. And I said, hi, Jackie, because I had met her because she used to go out with Aaron Spelling. And so just at that moment, Belden Cattleman comes in. He's in the terry cloth robe. He's come from his steam room. He turns to this beautiful Jackie Lane, and he says to her, get lost. And he takes me, and he throws a terry cloth robe at me. He says, come on, we'll go in the steam room. It's safe there. And so we go in the steam room, and he says to me, what kind of trouble are you in? And the lawyer had said, I said, I'm not in any trouble. I'm not in any trouble. He said, don't give me that shit. And he said, I know you're in. I said, how do you know? He said, it's my business to know stuff like that. So I told him everything. And he roared with laughter about the killer roommate, cellmate, and so forth. And he says to me, when's your arraignment? I said, Tuesday. Who's your judge? I said, Judge Quartz. He says, and anyway, then he dismisses me. So Tuesday comes. I'm panicked that I'm going to be in the newspapers, that the press is going to pick up, and so forth. We get there. The first case is mine. The judge calls all the lawyers, both sides, up to the thing. They have a whisper, whisper, whisper. And the guy comes back, my lawyer, and he says, who the hell do you know? He said, they threw out your case. My name was never even mentioned in the courtroom. And so the cops who had done this to me were so impressed with my connections. You know, we were shaking hands goodbye and so forth. So I get home and I call Belden Cattleman, the Las Vegas figure, and he's gone to Europe. And I didn't see him again. About 3 months later, I saw him at one of Tony Curtis's weddings. And I said to him, Belden, why did you do that for me? He said, I didn't do anything for you. I said, of course you did something for me. I said, they threw out the case. They never even mentioned my name. Why'd you do it? He said, when I first came to this town and I started going to the parties, nobody spoke to me, but you always did. I had a wonderful time on stage. I really enjoyed doing it.
I sat up naked in my bed with grapefruit sections in my hair, and I said, I'm taking over the camp.
I'm playing blackjack in Las Vegas, betting the minimum, when this new player walks up to the game. He's wearing a sports coat and this bright gold watch, and the pit boss recognizes him instantly. He says, Joe, good to see you. Your room's taken care of. Your meals are all set up. Anything's missing, you give me a call. The other players at the game and I exchange these envious glances. Our rooms have not been taken care of. Our meals are not set up. But we're not betting $500 a hand, which is what Joe proceeds to do. And he starts losing. He loses rapidly. In the next 20 minutes, he buys in for 30 grand, and he starts to panic. His face turns red. His hands are trembling. Then suddenly, just after losing a double down that cost him $1,000, Joe dies. He dies. Head on the betting square, gone. They clear out the body. They clean up the table. The other players and I are sitting there in shock. Next thing I know, the pit boss is standing behind me with a hand on my shoulder. He extends this coupon. Good for 1 complimentary admission to the buffet. I look up at him and say, a guy dies at my table and you're giving me a buffet comp? The pit boss says, I'm sorry. You're right. Let me see what I can do about a room.
So without any further ado, Beau Legendre.
Well, about 10 years ago, I woke up and I couldn't move my neck. And in the next few months, my entire body froze. And I was so weak that I couldn't lift a hairbrush without holding my right elbow in my left hand. And all the doctors could say was that they didn't know the cause and they didn't know the cure. So I decided I'd been bewitched. It all began with a love affair. All my life, I longed to find the perfect man and be in the perfect relationship. And in fact, I grew up at a time when women believed they weren't whole unless they were in a perfect relationship. And I tried corporate people, and I tried writers and artists, and I finally found the perfect man. And I knew he was perfect because he was the most inappropriate person from my family's point of view. His mother was my age, and his family lived in a commune in which they took LSD and had free love. My family lived in a plantation in South Carolina, and they went quail shooting in the afternoon and wore black tie and evening dresses every night for dinner. But we were in love, and we moved into a romantic little shack on a mountaintop. And we thought we'd grow corn and eat out of gourds. And we'd climb to the top of the mountain and hold each other's hands and look out at the sunset over the sea. And I felt I'd never known such happiness in my life. And this man was a healer. He was a kind of pseudo shaman who, by putting his hands on me, could take my pain away. And I soon found that he could hurt me as well, because when we broke up, it was like a layer of skin peeling off. And when he kissed me goodbye, it wasn't a kiss. It was like a sucking sensation in which he took something very important from me. And a month later, I found I couldn't move my neck. And my spine froze. And it took me 5 minutes to get from lying down to standing up. So I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "You've got polyalgia rheumatica. That is a disease of premature aging." And I said, "I'm not aging fast enough. I need to have this." So I went to another doctor, and he said, "You've got ankylosing spondylitis, and your spine is going to fuse of its own accord. And maybe you'll go blind." And I said, "Are you treating anybody else with ankylosing spondylitis?" And he said, "Everybody in my waiting room." And everybody in his waiting room was in a wheelchair or a walker. And I thought, my life's over. I might as well give up. What can I do? And an anthropologist friend of mine said that there were shamans in the jungle in Peru who healed with magic snakes. And since I knew that it was my frozen heart all over my body, I figured that magic was what I needed. And so I asked him to set the whole thing up. And I remembered William Burroughs had gone down to the Amazon and he'd taken a potion called ayahuasca from the yahe vine, where he'd met these magical beings. So I was all set to go, and I was completely excited because I was sure I was right. I was going to get hired, and I was going to get healed by these marvelous shamans in the jungle. And just before I left, I got a little nervous. So I called my doctor in New York, and I said, "I'm off to the Amazon to be healed, and do you think it's too dangerous?" And he said, "Haven't you gone yet? If you get healed by a witch doctor, I'll write a paper about it." So I set off to the Amazon. And from the moment I got there, everything went wrong. The first thing that happened was the translator I had hired went crazy and had to be put in the loony bin. The second thing was that we arrived at this wonderful jungle camp, and there was an argument over housing, because everybody wanted the same little palm leaf hut. And I got put in a great big hut with lots of German tourists with knapsacks. And on the porch, there was a little toilet with no seat and no pipe and a little plastic curtain between all the people with the cots in the house and that. And then the shaman said, "You can't take ayahuasca because you haven't been on the diet." So I thought, it's not going to work. I've come all the way to the Amazon, and the cure isn't going to work. But that night, the shaman took ayahuasca, and he looked at me, and the next day he did the diagnosis. And he said, "I saw a black hand come over your face, and a voice said, 'She's mine. And you've been cursed.'" And I said, "By whom?" knowing full well. And he said, "A young man." So I thought, maybe this will work out. And for the next 2 weeks, I went on the diet, breakfast, lunch, and supper, of white rice, tomatoes, and cucumbers. And at the end of a week, I had my first big healing session. And I went in the middle of the night to this little hut in the jungle where everything is hissing and squeaking and squawking around. And I got my little coconut cup of bitter black ayahuasca, and I sat down on the bench to wait for something to happen. It turned out I was waiting to throw up. The important thing that you need to know about ayahuasca is that it's not supposed to work until you throw up. But I couldn't throw up because I had a fused spine, and I can't even yawn. So I sat on the bench waiting for something to happen, and again, having performance anxiety that I'm not doing it right. But about that time, the entire little hut full of people exploded, and everybody went crazy. And they were throwing up, and they were screaming, and they were yelling, and they were carrying on. And I thought, I'm going to sit here on this bench because I'm going to be all right. Nothing bad is going to happen to me. I'm going to stay sane and sober. In fact, I even turned into Nurse Nightingale and helped all these other people that were on bad trips. And then everybody calmed down, and the shaman said, "The session's over, we're going to bed." And I went on my trip. And a huge green anaconda came towards me, and it said, "I'm going to wash you out." And with that, I turned into a washing machine on a suds and rinse cycle for the next 2 hours. And I had to be carried back down to the hut. But in the morning, I woke up completely clear. And when the shaman came to rub grapefruit sections on me to take the evil spirits out, I sat up naked in my bed with grapefruit sections in my hair, and I said, "I'm taking over the camp." Send those hippies and hangers-on away. Get rid of all the extra people. The only person who can stay is Barbara, my new friend, the German doctor. And what's more, I'm not sitting on these benches anymore. I want chairs and a toilet seat. And with that, I fell over in a dead faint. Well, to my absolute amazement, all these things occurred. And the chairs arrived by canoe up the Amazon. And I got a padded toilet seat with flowers on it. And so I thought, everything's going to be all right, and I'm going to get cured. And about a week later, I had my big ayahuasca session, and the Bonko shaman, the most powerful shaman of all, came with his mariri to cure me. Now, a mariri is a magic snake which lives inside the shaman, and the shaman has to smoke all day because the mariri lives on tobacco smoke. And so I'm sitting naked in the little ceremonial hut in the middle of the night, where the people are drumming and they're singing and I'm trying to throw up. And Ruperto is sucking up and down my spine with his long yellow teeth and his tobacco breath and his mariri so he can spit the spirits out. And lo and behold, something happens, and I see a rock and a metal suitcase disappear off my neck. And I think, it's worked. I came to the Amazon and it's worked. So the next day I left because the shaman saw an angel and an Egyptian king, which convinced him I was healed. And I went back home. And about 2 months later, I thought, well, maybe I'm not healed. Oh dear, perhaps am I not? And I thought I'd go to Brazil to another healer. And just at that moment, a friend called up and she said, "What would you do if you didn't go to Brazil?" And I said, "I think I'd clean out the closets. You know, the cancer truck man is coming to my part of the world tomorrow, and he could take out all my old clothes." And so I threw out my black cocktail dress from the corporate husband, and I threw out the meditation thing from that boyfriend, and the fringe shirts from the shaman boyfriend. And then I carried out my desktop computer, and I thought, my God, I was having a dicey time with a hairbrush not too long ago, and now I'm carrying out a computer. And I realized I had to go to the underworld of the Amazon to be healed by magic snakes in order to come back to that ordinary reality that the Zen teachers talk about, chopping wood and carrying water. in order to be an ordinary reality and clean out my closets. But I wasn't wrong about my frozen heart, because just the other day, I met a doctor who's doing a study at Stanford University on women with ankylosing spondylitis, and he said every one of them is in a bad relationship. The difference is they don't call it witchcraft, they call it the emotional intelligence of the body. Well, my emotional intelligence tells me I don't need to look anymore for the perfect relationship, because I am beginning to have it with myself.
You can tell a story about anything, but whatever it is has to have really happened to you, and it has to have a power about it. You know, stories about love and pain, and these are the exciting things. They're stories that everybody can relate to.
The woman behind the bulletproof glass screamed back at me at a 10 times the decibel level. Hey, all of Manhattan is a tow-away zone.
So I was a journalism major in college, and I got this job summer after freshman year for a magazine. But when I got to the office, I found out it wasn't like a regular magazine, it was a porn magazine in this like seedy office in the bottom of an office building called Celebrity Sleuth was the publication. And they would publish nudes of 40 celebrities every month. And my job was to answer letters. So what I found is that the most polite letter writers, by far, were prisoners. I think because they knew their letters are being watched by prison officials, or maybe they were like so desperate for their pornography that they like didn't want to be rude. So they give these like really specific requests, like, would you have any pictures of Oprah Winfrey's feet? And I'd have to like answer them and be like, no, we don't have any pictures of Oprah Winfrey's feet, but you know, we do have this like talk show special that you might like. The boss was really ashamed it was a porn magazine, so new employees, I would have to tell them what it was about. I'd be like, here's where we eat lunch. Oh, and it's a porn magazine. I hope that's okay. So it was kind of a weird place, but I had casual dress code, I got paid cash under the table, out at 5 every day, so I worked there for 3 summers.
Mr. Mark Katz.
If you've never been to the New York City car pound, it's the automotive equivalent of Rikers Island. Just a little slice of hell here on Earth. and you're immediately treated with contempt from the very moment you arrive. There are any number of endlessly long lines, and you have no idea which one is yours. You have to get on a long line to find out which long line you belong on. And so when I got to the front of the line where they told me my car had in fact been towed, I lost it. I said, there was no sign that said towaway zone. I got about 4 syllables into my tirade before the woman behind the bulletproof glass screamed back at me at 10 times the decibel level. Hey, all of Manhattan is a towaway zone. Now, to understand what you're up against in this place, you really have to understand who you're up against in this place. And it's my theory that the people who work there may have lacked the social graces to work in the regular DMV. But it's worse than that. It's worse than that because they've been there for year after year, decade after decade, seeing endless lines of seething people. And they are eager to, if you show them the least bit of anger, they are eager to retaliate in thermonuclear fashion. Because as much as you are angry with them and live with them, they hate you more. And that's when you realize that the bulletproof glass is there for your protection. Because as much as you hate them, they are, the most likely scenario is they're gonna take out a gun and shoot you. I was sent to another line to find out how much I owed, and I became very nervous when the guy in front of me on the line got hit up for unpaid parking tickets over years and years. What starts out as a parking infraction ends up as a full-scale financial audit. And I was very nervous because I didn't think I had any unpaid parking tickets, but I did owe a not insignificant amount of money to the Columbia House Record Club. So I got to my front of the line, and she explains to me that I owe $271. It was $100 for the ticket, it was $150 for the towing expense, and I had accrued $21 in interest in the hour that had elapsed. And they didn't seem open to haggling. I took out my credit card. They had a good laugh at that. They don't take credit cards. They don't take checks. They take cash. Just another piece of information that's been withheld from you up until now. So I went to get the cash from across the street. I come back with a large stack of bills. I hand them the large stack of bills, and that's when I found out the piece of information that hurt me the most. I handed them $280. They told me they don't take change. I didn't have exact change. I gave them $280, $271 for the amount I owed them, and a $9 tip. And I learned a lesson that day. It's a lesson all New Yorkers must learn for themselves. And it's a lesson I'm reminded of every now and again when I see a guy parking his Jaguar on the street, or I see a manhole cover with steam coming out of it and fresh air being sucked back in. Or a sewer on the curb whose iron grates only cover up half of the drain. And that lesson is, it is easier than you or I may be willing to admit to ourselves for any one of us to fall through the cracks and find ourselves in the underworld. Thank you.
I catalog things that happen to me, and anytime someone makes reference to something, I have a story, or I have a story to match it, and I enjoy telling them. People who know me well are sick of my stories, but I enjoy telling them.
Most people, when I tell them that I went to military school, they react with profound disbelief and mirth.
I grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and Virginia Beach is a resort town, so there's no crime. Like, our cops ride on bicycles and wear sunglasses. And, you know, like, people steal stuff, but they steal, like, little plastic shovels from the store. Or they fight over, you know, who gets to fish off the pier first. I always wanted crime, you know? I wanted intrigue or something. So one time we were driving home from the grocery store with my dad, and I saw a pizza place on the side of the road, Tony's, and we'd never been there, I don't know, for any particular reason, and I asked him about it. He was like, oh, yeah, Tony's. Oh, you know, that used to be run by the mafia. Really, like, nonchalantly, but really proudly, and this was the coolest thing I'd ever heard in my life. So he tells me that, oh, yeah, the mafia used to send people down from New York, you know, to cool down in Virginia Beach. And anyway, yeah, one of them used to run Tony's, and, oh, they busted the place about 20 years ago, big news. So from then on out, if I wanted to get some pizza, you know, I go to Domino's, but if I wanted to feel alive, then I went to Tony's.
Our next storyteller is Edgar Oliver. And I'm going to bring Edgar up.
At the age of 17, I was living in Savannah, Georgia, and I was in my last year at Benedictine Military School. And most people, when I tell them that I went to military school, they react with profound disbelief and mirth. But I actually had tons of fun in military school. And I was oddly, strangely, almost, I would say, insanely popular with the military staff. So that by the time I was a senior, I was actually one of the highest ranking officers in the entire school, namely the belief that because I was a very good student academically, that I was a very well-organized person, which is very far from the truth. I was in charge of just all the military records for all of the students for the whole school year, recording merits and demerits and like marksmanship scores and I don't know, scores in assembling and disassembling rifles and God knows what all, but all these facts of which would eventually be very important in well, determining the fates of all these poor boys. Well, I didn't really concern myself too much with this until it came time for the general inspection, at which point all of these big military brass from up north, like from West Point, would come down and tour, you know, these southern military schools and rank them. And Benedictine was always very high-ranking, and this was very important to Benedictine. And I realized that the military records of the school were just in horrific disarray. And the general inspection was in about 2 days, and there was no way that my staff of underlings and my staff whom I'd allowed to do whatever they wanted during the course of the year, during this period of the day, you know, there was no way we'd be able to get these records set straight. And so I went to poor Sergeant Harold, who was this very nice sergeant who was, you know, one of the real, actual, you know, military personnel in charge of all the boys. And I just said, well, you know, Sergeant Harold, can I please take all the military records for the entire school home with me so I can work on them at night? And that was a very unorthodox thing to ask. In fact, I mean, it was completely insane. But Sergeant Harold actually realized, I think, that he had allowed this whole situation to develop, and that if it was discovered, it was going to come home to him, absolutely. And so he begrudgingly said, okay. So, well, I brought the records home. I'll try and wrap this story up quickly. I stayed up all night, madly recording all these, all this information. The next morning at dawn, I was waiting by the bus stop with my book bag filled with all the military records. And in a moment of ecstasy at the beauty of the dawn, I strolled around the corner to gaze at the sun rising over the crumbling side of town. I was only gone about 2 minutes. I walked back, and my book bag was gone. I just looked at this empty street, and I realized that my future held nothing short of court-martial and ruination. I came home, I called Sergeant Harold. I informed him that I was never returning to Benedictine Military Academy again, and that he could deal with the consequences as best he could. I then went in my uniform to the central office of the police in downtown Savannah and informed them that important military documents had been stolen. Something must be done. I don't think they realized I was a high school student, and with my rather odd accent, I really think they thought that the Cold War had come to a head in downtown Savannah. I went home and sat in my living room alone, listening to police sirens wail across town as the police scoured downtown Savannah. I was will-less, unable to think, when suddenly the doorbell rang. And I thought, there it is, the court-martial, they've come for me. I went and I looked through the peephole, and my expectations were fulfilled. 3 crew-cutted heads in a row in the fish-eye lens. I opened the door, and the crew-cutted heads were atop these military shoulders. I thought, yes, they dressed to the hilt to come and take me to my execution. They held up my book bag and said, "Is this yours?" And, well, I was not executed. I was not court-martialed. Who knows what would have happened, but somehow I was saved that afternoon. Thank you.
The Moth, the premise being that you don't absolutely know everything that's going to come out of your mouth, and that you're doing it a little bit improvised, makes for a special sort of exhilarating terror.